What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about MaXXXine. Written and directed by Ty West, this film stars people like Mia Goth, Elizabeth Debicki, Giancarlo Esposito, Halsey, Kevin Bacon, and many, many more. So here we are talking about the final film in Ty West's X trilogy. It all started with X just a few years ago that took place during the 1970s, following a young group of underground porn filmmakers who decide to film this on a farm that they rented out. Turns out that the old couple that lives there were not privy to what they were doing, and they end up starting to murder them. It turns into a full-on 1970s slasher. The old woman that's a part of that murderous duo is the character of Pearl, who would end up getting a prequel played by Mia Goth in both films. Mia Goth also played MaXXXine, the main character and final girl of the first film. And here we are now with the third installment that is an actual sequel to X. And of course, now that we've had Pearl and we've had X, we've gotten a lot of the story, and now we follow up the character of MaXXXine, the final girl, the final survivor of that first film, X. And so going into this movie, I was pretty excited. I enjoyed X. I gave that a good review when I talked about it here on the channel. Didn't love it maybe as much as some people, but I thought it was a solid movie. I enjoyed it a lot. And then we ended up getting Pearl, and I thought that that was probably my favorite performance from Mia Goth. Loved that film. I enjoyed it quite a bit more than X personally, and I just thought it was a really cool film overall stylistically. And I think when it comes down to the overall vision that Ty West has had with this trilogy, it's been really interesting. This film takes place during the 1980s and very much feels like a film from the 80s. And if you guys have watched this channel for any amount of time, or if you've just been around for a good few years, I have covered dozens and dozens of films from the 80s, but most notably horror films from the 80s. So as a longtime fan of 80s horror, it was very nice to jump into this film that very much had a 80s nostalgic vibe to it. Everything about the way the film was shot, the lighting, the music, everything about it felt like an 80s throwback with an almost crime noir kind of vibe to it that very much felt like it was something right up my alley. And when you look at X, I felt like that very much felt like a 1970s slasher, and with Pearl taking place in 1918, it very much felt like early days of filmmaking when it came down to its credits, its performances, and its overall aesthetic. While it is a little bit more modernized, of course, because it's kind of hard to fully make a movie feel like it came out in the early 1920s or late 1910s, I think that Ty West has done a really great job of making each film in this trilogy feel very much like the films in that time frame had it actually come out in that time frame. So here we are talking about MaXXXine, which follows up the character of MaXXXine. It takes place in 1985, and she's currently in this period of her career where she's transitioning from porn into actual movies. She's been given the opportunity to be in a big horror film. She's really excited about the prospects of this kind of taking her from being just a porn star into a movie star. But while this is all going on, there's also a serial killer on the loose known as the Night Stalker, who is going around killing women in the night that she has to kind of be wary of. And while this is happening, she kind of has a threat that's kind of looming around her, where it seems like her past is coming back to haunt her. And that's the base gist of this film. I won't get into any spoilers, but yeah, going into it, I was pretty excited. Mia Goth has become a really big actress in the horror world in the last few years, most notably because of X and Pearl, and she's kind of become a modern day scream queen incredibly fast because of this trilogy. And having just rewatched Pearl earlier today because my wife hadn't seen it and she wanted to see it before we saw this, I was really impressed with her performance when I first saw it in Pearl, and rewatching it again today, I mean, she gives a great performance in that film. So I was very happy to be watching a new film with her in the lead role. And so what I could say about MaXXXine on an overall level right out of the gate is that I think it's an incredibly well-made film when it comes down to performances and all of the other technical aspects. I've already leaned into it a little bit in the early part of when I was talking about it, but it very much feels like a film from the 1980s. The lighting, the musical score, some of the needle drops throughout the course of the film, the overall aesthetic of the film, the way a lot of the scenes are shot. Of course, if you've seen these films, they very much are slashers in their own way, so even some of the way that the kills were framed in this film very much feels like something that came from a 1980s horror film. And so yeah, as a longtime fan of 1980s horror, it was nice to have this throwback film that aesthetically looked very much like a film from the 1980s and was very much an homage. Then you add in this element that there is this serial killer around, you have this crime noir element to the film as well, and then of course, as you've seen seen with the previous two films, there is that kind of raunchiness that Ty West brings to these films, especially with MaXXXine, the character, being somebody who's involved in the adult porn industry. So I think that for the most part, these films have balanced a really great sense of sexy, but kind of gross and raunchy, while also being able to very much tackle various different kinds of film styles that we've seen over the course of decades. And I think that Ty West is a really interesting visionary when it comes down to the way that he directs his films. And when you have somebody like Mia Goth in the lead role, you definitely don't have to worry that performance in the lead role is going to be bad. On top of her, you also have people like Elizabeth Debicki in here, Giancarlo Esposito, Halsey, Kevin Bacon, Michelle Monaghan, and Bobby Cannavale, who all give great performances as well. And that's just a few of the actors. There's a few other roles and supporting roles throughout the course of the film that are played from some lesser known actors and just some other bigger names in general as well, that honestly gave really great performances. And since these films are a little bit over the top at times, there are moments where some of these performances are able to ham it up a little bit and be very fun and entertaining. So when it comes down to all the technical aspects of this film, I think that Ty West, as an overall with this trilogy, has done a great job of casting great actors for these roles, whether they're big roles or small roles, and everybody has shown up to play. And I think that with Mia Goth at the center of it, it is only strengthened, honestly, and she does a great job in this role once again as the character of MaXXXine. But technical elements aside, if I have to be completely and utterly honest on my take on this film, I would say that this is probably my least favorite of the trilogy. By no means do I think this is a bad film, but what I can say is that it was one of those films that kind of lost me as things were going on. The first portion of this film I found to be a really interesting crime noir. There was that drama horror element with some slasher elements that I really enjoyed. Everything about the style of it and feeling like an 80s horror film very much was pulling me in, and I was engaged by the transition of this individual who wants to become a star. She wants to put her past behind her. Of course, we know that she killed people in X in order to survive and get away, and so she's willing to do everything and anything that she possibly can to reach this status of becoming a movie star and to put that porn life behind her. And so I really was interested in her journey, while also having to navigate the fact that there's a serial killer out there and navigate the fact that possibly her past is coming back to haunt her. And I think that Mia Goth weighs all of that on her, or wears all of that on her in this role really, really well. I was really interested to kind of see the behind the scenes of her becoming a movie star and kind of some of the hurdles that she kind of had to jump over in order to achieve that goal. But about halfway through the movie, I started to feel like the movie was meandering a little bit. That's not to say that the film didn't have a vision. It never felt aimless, but just that we weren't necessarily progressing as much as I would have liked it to. And then by the time we got to the end of the film, the finale bit of the film, while I enjoyed what was done there when it comes down to the performances and all the other technical aspects I've already praised, I ultimately felt like it went from a really interesting crime noir in the earlier part of the film into a finale that very much felt like a sketch out of one of the VHS films. And if you guys have seen some of my reviews for some of the VHS films here on the channel, while I haven't reviewed all of those films, and there are some that I enjoy, I'm not the biggest fan of some of the sketches that you tend to see, some of the skits that you tend to see in those films. Sometimes I feel like they can be a little bit too dumb and over the top, and that's kind of how I felt about the end of this film. It didn't necessarily impact me the same way that the ending of something like Pearl did, or even something like X did, and I found myself really engaged with the first portion of this film. There was a mystery to it all. There was kind of this question of, what's going to happen to MaXXXine? Is she going to be outed for her past? Is she going to be able to become a movie star? Who is the Night Stalker? All these questions that I thought were really interesting that the film presented in the earlier part, only for us to get answers at the end that I felt were just okay. It never really felt like it overly did anything that was all that amazing or really impactful to me. And the last segment of the film, again, almost just felt like this over-the-top kind of cartoony sketch that you would see as one of the anthology stories in something like VHS. Take that as you will. It's not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. I do think there are going to be some people who will enjoy this film far more than me, but as the movie was coming to a close, as the credits were rolling, I was impressed by all the technical aspects of the film. I was impressed by the performances, but I wanted more. There was a part of me that started to just lose interest as the runtime went on, and I was really into it for the first half of the film. Not a bad film, but just not one that I think I would be running to revisit. And when I look at this trilogy, with this being the last installment, it just didn't impress me as much as something like Pearl did. And while Mia Goth, I think, is incredible in this film, having just rewatched Pearl right before this, I think her performance is so much better because of the material she's given in Pearl. Whereas with MaXXXine, I feel like while Mia Goth is great in the film, there is an element that felt like she was a little bit more reserved in this role because of what was on the page when it came down to the writing. That's by no means to say that she does not give a good performance here, because she really does, but it just never felt like her character, MaXXXine, was ever really given much on the page to ever have a moment where she really shines. A lot of the film is kind of her worried or scared or trying to do something, trying to accomplish a goal, and her kind of clearly being somebody who's a little bit stressed about it, more so than us actually seeing her go through this wide array of emotions that really feel like you go on a real journey with this character. At the end of the day, what I could say is that MaXXXine is a pretty solid ending to this trilogy. By no means a bad film, but definitely my least favorite of the three. It's not the one that I could see myself revisiting the most. I thought the first half of the film was really solid, but again, I do think that's going to just be my personal opinion on the film, and I think depending on your personal taste, you may enjoy this film more, you may enjoy this film less. I don't think this is one that's going to be a flat out crowd pleaser, but I don't think this is the film either that is going to be something that people just flat out hate either. I can see a lot of people being in the middle on this film, having just heard some of the opinions from the other various critics that were at the press screening that I was at. It seemed like a lot of them were kind of in the same boat. Some of them seemed to enjoy it a little bit more, but it seemed like a lot of them were saying, yeah, it was my least favorite of the bunch, but I still found it to be an entertaining time. So I look forward to hearing what all of you guys have to say as this film starts to roll out into theaters. Did you enjoy MaXXXine? Where does it rank for you in the new trilogy of films that Ty West has created? And do you think Mia Goth is going to continue to have this ginormous career in horror, or do you think that this trilogy is going to mainly be her thing? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.